Yeah, that's such an important question in terms of, the audience. And I think obviously it's very clear who the target audience is, and that was really important for us. Well, for myself from the very beginning, and then when I invited Kezna into the project, she was also really kind of adamant about that as well, in terms of like who our target audience is. And I also feel like really lucky to have been able to work with Ashley and Oliver at Metonymy Press, because we really did have like that full freedom to tell the story the way that we wanted to, without having to restrict ourselves or to censor ourselves, which I am quite confident would have been the case had we been working with a either larger or more traditional publisher. And so for me, that was like, like you can't put a price on that. And that was like not negotiable for us. And so like that target audience piece is really important. However, when it comes to like, the reading and the sharing of the book, it really is for everybody to read and to share. And I think that's another thing that is interesting. I had lots of people message or ask like, would it be appropriate for me to buy this book for my child or for someone else's child, say, who is not a Black girl? And my answer is always like, of course. But I think it also speaks to, again, this goes back to like those themes of diversity and inclusion, but then the undercurrent of white supremacy, right? Which is like, all our lives, like we had to read books where we were not in them. And there was never any kind of a question of like, oh, well, does it make sense for you to be reading this book where you are not at all represented? But now that we have like this story that is like targeted to Black girls, it's like, oh, well, what happens? So it really kind of like speaks to, I think, the total kind of lack of representation in and across kind of like all forms of media, but also that idea of like, these stories are not in isolation. They're not to be separate. Like they don't deserve to be in kind of like, like an alternative kind of category. Like these are the stories, because like Black girls exist just like everybody else. And so I think there's something interesting there, kind of just even in the reflection of like, is this a book I should be engaging in? I think like the question is there, like, well, what is it that's making you feel like that resistance or like that apprehension? And what does that say about what we think about or what we learn about Black girls, or Black people kind of more broadly, and when and where do our stories get to be told and to be heard? And I think it's also incredibly important that Black boys, and also just like Black children and Black people of all genders, engage with this story and celebrate this story, and not just because they will see, people that they love and people in their lives reflected on the pages and in the story, but because like we are important, and deserve to be celebrated and honored as well. And so I think, again, like that's a good entry point, because it's a great conversation to have with a young child about like, oh, this person maybe looks like your sister or your mom or your friend or your teacher. But also I really want to push back on that idea that like we should only care about those girls because we are in relationship with them. And I think that happens often, where like we should care about them because they are people and they are beings, and we should like care about all beings, on this planet, and other planets too. But anyways, so I think there's something just important there about like kind of inviting people into the story, but also being like really, really clear about who we want in like the front row. And so I think it's been like a dance of figuring that out, making sure that we're always kind of centering and staying true to ourselves and our intention with this book. But we don't just want Black girls in the room, because as much as we need to hear this story and see this story, like the rest of the world does as well.